Elara, a 23-year-old Omega apothecary assistant in the Grayhaven Pack, is falsely accused of poisoning the pack's well after political enemies frame her with hemlock residue on her hands while she is preparing medicine. Condemned to death, she shocks the crowd by singing an ancient death hymn moments before her execution, unknowingly awakening the dormant power of her hidden Nightsong bloodline. The song reaches Kael Ravencrest, the Alpha King of the Northern Sovereignty, whose wolf recognizes her as his fated mate. After running across multiple territories without stopping, Kael arrives just in time, halts the execution, defeats Grayhaven's authority without bloodshed, and takes Elara away under his protection. Along the journey, he treats her with patience and respect, allowing her complete freedom to choose her future rather than forcing the mate bond upon her. At Ravencrest, healer Tessa discovers Elara has suffered years of abuse, malnutrition, and neglect, while further examinations confirm she is not an ordinary Omega, but the last surviving member of the legendary Nightsong bloodline, whose wolves possess ancient songs capable of commanding wolves and awakening the long-dormant Moonwell. Kael reveals that Elara's family history was deliberately erased after the Nightsong clan was nearly exterminated because of a prophecy that their bloodline could break an Alpha's absolute authority. Meanwhile, Alpha Roderick Graves of the Ashfall Pack is exposed as the mastermind behind poisoning Grayhaven's well and framing Elara, intending to have her executed before her identity could be discovered. Graves invades Ravencrest with hundreds of wolves to capture her, but Elara uses her newly awakened voice to sing an ancient command that frees many enemy wolves from his control, while Kael defeats Graves and strips him of his alpha bond rather than killing him. As Elara recovers physically and emotionally, she gradually falls in love with Kael because of his kindness, restraint, and unwavering respect rather than the mating bond itself. Guided by her instincts, she discovers the hidden Moonwell beneath Ravencrest and successfully awakens it, with the ancient songs fulfilling the prophecy that had remained dormant for 3 centuries. Realizing she wants both Kael and the future they can build together, she willingly accepts the mating bond on her own terms. 3 days later, before the entire Northern Sovereignty, the two publicly complete their claiming ceremony, making Elara the Luna of Ravencrest. Together they vow to restore the lost Nightsong heritage, protect the awakened moon, while lead their people through the political challenges ahead and ensure that the ancient songs silent for 300 years will never disappear again. The rope around her wrists smelled like rendered tallow and old blood, and the knot pressed directly into the burn scar that had never healed properly since the night they dragged her from the apothecary. Elara knelt on the stone platform at 4 in the center of Grayhaven's execution square, her bare knees grinding against frost-covered granite, and she could feel every individual crystal of ice melting into her skin like tiny teeth. The death hymn was already forming in her throat before the executioner even finished reading the charges. She had been the Pack's apothecary assistant for 11 years, not the apothecary herself. Never that. Old Mirren had held the title, and Elara had been the one who actually ground the tinctures, who memorized which moss drew infection from a wound and which root could slow a hemorrhage. Mirren took the credit, Mirren took the coin. Elara took the knowledge and kept her mouth shut because an Omega who knew too much was an Omega who ended up exactly where she was right now, on her knees waiting to die. The square was packed. She could smell them, hundreds of wolves pressed together in the bitter morning air, their breath rising in clouds that caught the pale winter light. Cedar smoke from the braziers they had lit along the perimeter, wet wool from their cloaks, and underneath all of it the sharp vinegar tang of collective anticipation that a crowd gets when blood is about to be spilled. Alpha Declan stood at the front of the gathered pack, his arms crossed over his chest, his face arranged in that expression she had come to know so well over the years. Not anger exactly, something flatter. The look of a man performing a duty he found mildly inconvenient, like signing paperwork. The charges were poisoning. They said she had contaminated the Pack's western well with hemlock concentrate, that 3 pups had fallen ill, that she had been found with hemlock residue on her hands. She had been found with hemlock residue on her hands because she had been making an antispasmodic tincture for a pregnant she-wolf whose contractions had started 6 weeks too early. Hemlock in trace amounts properly diluted was one of only 3 compounds that could relax uterine muscles without harming the child. Every herbalist in 3 territories knew this. But Elara was not an herbalist, she was an Omega. And an Omega caught with poison was simply a poisoner. The executioner, a broad-shouldered beta named Corwin, who had once asked her to treat his daughter's ear infection and never paid finished reading from the scroll. His voice carried the bored cadence of a man reading a grocery list. Elara lifted her chin. This was the part they did not expect. This was the part that would cost her nothing because she was already going to die. And a dead woman's defiance is the only currency that cannot be taxed. She opened her mouth and began to sing. The death hymn of the old packs was not a song anyone learned. It was a song that lived in the blood, in the marrow, in whatever ancient thing remained of the wolves who had walked before territories had names. It was sung by the condemned as a final act of spiritual autonomy, a declaration that the soul departing was leaving on its own terms. It had not been sung in Grayhaven in living memory because Grayhaven did not produce wolves who died with dignity. Grayhaven produced wolves who begged. Elara did not beg. Her voice was rough at first. She had not had water since the night before, and her throat felt like she had swallowed a handful of sand, but the melody found its footing in her chest, vibrating through her sternum, and the notes rose into the frozen air with a clarity that surprised even her. The crowd went silent, not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight that presses against your eardrums that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. She sang the first verse, the one about the body returning to earth, and the words came in the old tongue, a language she had never studied but somehow knew the way you know how to breathe or how to flinch when fire gets too close. The syllables tasted like iron and pine resin on her tongue. Alpha Declan uncrossed his arms. She saw it from the corner of her eye, a small movement but notable because Declan never fidgeted. He was watching her with something she had never seen on his face before. Not guilt. Declan did not do guilt. But discomfort, maybe. The faintest crease between his brows like a man hearing a frequency just at the edge of perception that he cannot quite identify but knows he should recognize. She sang the second verse, the one about the wolf spirit running free, and that was when the ground shook. Not an earthquake, something different. Something that came up through the stone platform and resonated in her kneecaps, in her hip bones, in the base of her skull. A vibration that matched the frequency of her song so precisely that for one disorienting moment she could not tell where her voice ended and the tremor began. The crowd felt it too. She saw bodies swaying, hands reaching for one another, faces turning confused and pale. Then the howl came. It came from the northern tree line, from the dense black pine forest that bordered Grayhaven's territory, and it was the largest sound Elara had ever heard, not the loudest, the largest. It occupied space the way a mountain occupies space. It filled the square the way water fills a glass, pressing into every corner, every gap, every silence. And it was singing her song back to her. The howl matched her melody note for note, a half beat behind weaving a harmony around her voice like a vine climbing a trellis. Where her notes were clear and solitary, the howl was rich, layered, almost orchestral, as if a single throat contained a chorus. Elara's voice faltered. She had studied wolves her entire life. She knew the sounds they made, territorial calls, warning barks, the low keening of grief. She had never, in any text or any living memory, heard a wolf harmonize with a human voice. The howl grew closer. The crowd was breaking apart now. Wolves stumbling backward, some shifting involuntarily, their bodies responding to a dominance frequency that bypassed the conscious mind entirely. She saw Corwin, the executioner, drop his ceremonial axe. It clattered against the stone with a sound like a bell being struck wrong. Alpha Declan had gone rigid. His eyes were wide, the amber almost completely swallowed by black pupil, and his nostrils were flaring in rapid succession like a man trying to catch a scent that kept slipping away. The trees at the northern edge of the square shuddered. Not from wind, something was pushing through them, something large enough to bend mature black pines like grass. And then the wolf emerged. Elara had seen alpha wolves before. Declan's shifted form was the size of a draft horse, considered impressive by any standard. The wolf that stepped out of the tree line made Declan look like a yearling. It was black, but not uniformly. The fur shifted between true black and a deep iridescent blue-black, like a raven's wing catching light. And where the weak winter sun hid its coat colors, moved beneath the surface deep violet, dark gold, the red of old garnets. Its eyes were not amber, they were silver, a pure, molten silver that reflected nothing and illuminated everything. And they were fixed on Elara with an intensity that she felt in her solar plexus like a physical blow. The wolf was still singing. The harmony flowed from its open jaws, visible as a faint shimmer in the cold air. And Elara realized with a shock that traveled the length of her spine that she was still singing too. Her voice had resumed without her permission, drawn out by the harmony the way a magnet draws iron filings. The wolf crossed the square in 4 strides. Wolves scattered from its path like leaves before a gale. It stopped directly in front of the execution platform, its enormous head level with her kneeling body, and the heat radiating from its fur hit her face like opening an oven door. She smelled it then, not the smell of wolf which she knew well. Something else. Charred cedar dark honey, the mineral sharpness of a riverstone held in the palm until it warms, and underneath all of it something that was not a smell at all but a recognition. A bone-deep click like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Her wolf stirred. This was the secret, the one she had carried for 23 years, the one that had cost her more than any accusation of poisoning ever could. Because Elara did have a wolf. She had always had a wolf, but her wolf had never once responded to anything. Not to the moon, not to the shift training they forced all pups through at 13, which had left her convulsing on the floor of the training hall while the instructors declared her wolfless. Not to fear or pain or the dozens of moments in her life when a wolf would have saved her from what came next. Her wolf had been waiting. It had been waiting for this. The thing inside her chest that she had spent her entire life trying to coax awake suddenly uncoiled with a force that made her gasp. It was not painful. It was the opposite of pain. It was the feeling of a cramp releasing of a held breath finally exhaled, of a bone being set back into its socket after years of dislocation. Her wolf rose inside her like a tide, and for the first time in her life, Elara felt whole. The massive wolf before her stopped singing. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the individual snowflakes landing on the fur of its muzzle. Then it began to shift. The process was nothing like the shifts she had witnessed in Grayhaven. Pack wolves shifted with a crack of bone and a brief convulsion, graceless and efficient. The shift was fluid, almost liquid. The wolf's form dissolving and reforming like ink dropped in water. Fur became skin. Paws became hands. The enormous frame condensed, reorganized, sculpted itself into something that was both less and more than what it had been. The man who stood where the wolf had been was tall. Not Declan tall, which was the height of authority, carefully maintained. This was the height of something that had never needed to prove itself. Broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist. Dark hair, longer than military fashion, falling past his jaw in strands still damp with the morning frost. A scar running from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, white against brown skin, old and deep and worn like a badge rather than hidden like a shame. His eyes were still silver. He was naked as all shifters were after a shift, and he seemed entirely unbothered by this. He looked at Elara the way a man looks at water after crossing a desert. Not with greed. With recognition. He reached out and placed one hand against the side of her face. His palm so warm it almost burned, and said in a voice that was rough and low and carried the residual vibration of that impossible howl. "You were singing my mother's song." Elara stared at him. Up close she could see that his silver eyes had flecks of darker gray near the pupils, like storm clouds seen from above. His hand smelled like the forest he had come from, cold pine sap and crushed fern and the electric ozone scent of a wolf that had been running flat out for a very long time. "I do not know your mother," she said. "No," he agreed. His thumb moved against her cheekbone, tracing the edge of a bruise that Corwin heard during the arrest. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went very, very still. "Who did this?" "It was not a question. Does it matter?" she said. "I am about to be executed." "No," he said, "you are not." He turned then, and the turning itself was a spectacle because the authority that radiated from him hit the crowd like a wave of heat from a forge. Elara saw wolves who had been standing upright actually stagger, some dropping to one knee, responding to a dominant aura, so powerful it overrode their bond with their own alpha. Declan stepped forward. To his credit, he did not kneel, but his face had gone the color of old wax, and his hands, which Elara had never seen tremble, were trembling now. "You are in Grayhaven territory," Declan said, and his voice only cracked slightly. "Identify yourself." The stranger looked at Declan the way a hawk looks at a field mouse that has just demanded identification. "Kael Ravencrest," he said. "Alpha King of the Northern Sovereignty." The sound that went through the crowd was not a gasp, it was more primal than that. A collective intake of breath that was half terror and half awe. The Northern Sovereignty was not a pack, it was a dominion. 5 territories consolidated under a single bloodline that had held power since before the Great Division. A dynasty so old that other alphas told stories about them the way humans tell stories about gods. And the Ravencrest Alpha had not left the sovereignty in over a decade. No one visited the north, no one was invited. The last diplomatic envoy that had attempted to enter Ravencrest lands had been returned to their pack in pieces, each piece neatly wrapped in oilcloth with a handwritten note that said simply no. Declan swallowed visibly. The Omega is a convicted poisoner. She contaminated our water supply and endangered pups. This is an internal matter. Kael Ravencrest did not look at Declan when he responded. He was looking at Elara again, and there was something in his expression that she could not read. It read something complicated and fierce and strangely fragile, like a man holding something he had been told he would never find. That woman, Kael said, is my mate. The word landed in the square like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of murmur spread outward through the crowd. She is a convicted criminal of Grayhaven Pack, Declan repeated, and Elara could hear the stubborn pride fighting against the survival instinct in his voice. Declan was not a coward. He was simply a man who had spent his life as the largest predator in any room and was now standing in the shadow of something that made him feel small. Kael turned his full attention to Declan for the first time. And Declan flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but Elara saw it, and she saw that Kael saw it too. Let me explain something to you, Kael said, and his voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which made it infinitely more frightening than if he had shouted. I have been running for 9 days. I crossed 3 territories without stopping because I felt a bond activate that I have been waiting for since I was 16 years old. I have not slept. I have not eaten. I have run through 2 blizzards and a border skirmish with the Ashfall Pack, during which I killed 4 wolves without slowing down. I am telling you this so you understand the degree to which I am not in a negotiating mood. He paused. Let the silence do its work. You will release her. You will release her now, or I will release her myself, and the manner in which I do so will leave a mark on this pack that your grandchildren will still be explaining to their grandchildren. Declan's jaw worked. Behind him, his beta commander, a woman named Sarah, with close-cropped red hair and a permanent expression of controlled hostility, put her hand on his arm. It was a gesture of restraint, not comfort. Alpha Declan Sarah said quietly but loudly enough for the front rows to hear. The Northern Sovereignty has 12,000 wolves. We have 800. Mathematics, the most persuasive argument in any language. Declan looked at Elara, and this is where it happened, the moment she would remember later with more confusion than anything else that happened that morning. Because Declan's expression, just for an instant, was not angry or defiant or calculating. It was tired. Deeply bone-achingly tired, the exhaustion of a man who had inherited a pack he was not large enough to lead and had spent every day since then pretending otherwise. She saw the weight of it in the lines around his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, in the way his gaze moved over her face like he was looking for something he could use but finding nothing. He had not wanted to execute her. She realized this with a clarity that was almost nauseating. He had not wanted to, but the pack had demanded it. And Declan led by giving the pack what it demanded because that was the only kind of leadership he knew. He was not cruel, he was weak. And weakness in a world of wolves wore cruelty like a borrowed coat. Cut her loose, Declan said. Corwin fumbled with the ropes. His hands were shaking so badly that the knots tightened instead of loosened, and Elara felt the tallow-stiff hemp bite deeper into the burn scar on her wrist. She hissed through her teeth. Kael was beside her before the sound finished leaving her mouth. He did not push Corwin. He simply wrapped one hand around the rope binding Elora's wrists and pulled. The rope snapped like thread. The fibers parted with a sound like a small branch breaking, and the pressure on her wrists vanished so suddenly that her hands tingled as blood returned to her fingers. Kael looked at the burn scar that the rope had been pressing against. Then he looked at Corwin. You tied the knot over an existing wound, Kael said. Corwin took a step backward. I was just the protocol says, what is your name, Corwin, sir? Corwin Ashworth. Kael did not respond to this. He simply looked at Corwin for 3 seconds, which does not sound like a long time until you are the one being looked at by a wolf with silver eyes and a scar that suggests he has ended many arguments permanently. Then he turned, which was somehow worse than any threat he could have made because it meant Corwin had been noted and filed and would be remembered at a time of Kael's choosing. Kael lifted Elara to her feet. She was unsteady. She had been kneeling for over an hour, and her legs had gone numb from the cold granite, and the sudden rush of sensation as she stood made the square spin around her. She grabbed his forearm for balance, and the contact sent a jolt through her that she felt in her teeth. He felt it too. She saw it in the way his pupils dilated, the silver irises contracting to thin rings around expanding black. His hand tightened on her arm, not painfully, but involuntarily, the way a hand closes around something precious that it is afraid of dropping. Can you walk? He asked. "I have been walking my entire life on less than this," she said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. The ghost of one, maybe. The suggestion that a smile might someday visit that face if given sufficient reason. He unclasped the heavy, fur-lined cloak from his own shoulders and wrapped it around hers. It was enormous on her, the hem dragging the ground, and it smelled overwhelmingly of him. The charred cedar and dark honey and river stone scent that made her wolf press against the inside of her ribs like a dog pressing its nose against a window. "We are leaving," Kael said to no one in particular and everyone at once. "You cannot just take a prisoner of Grayhaven and leave," Declan said, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. He was going through the motions now, saying the words protocol required so that later he could tell his pack he had not simply surrendered. Kael paused. He looked back over his shoulder. "Watch me," he said. They walked out of the square, the crowd parted before them like curtains being drawn, and Elara felt every eye on her back like individual points of heat, and she kept her spine straight and her chin up because she was wrapped in the cloak of the Alpha King of the Northern Sovereignty, and she would be damned before she would let Grayhaven see her stumble. They reached the tree line. The black pines closed behind them like a door. Elara made it 47 steps into the forest before her legs gave out. She did not fall. Kael caught her one arm around her waist, and the ease with which he took her weight told her everything she needed to know about the strength differential between them. She weighed nothing to him. Less than nothing, he could have carried her in one arm and fought a war with the other. "When did you last eat?" he said. "Yesterday." "No. The day before." She could not remember. The cell had been dark and time had become approximate. He lowered her onto a fallen log, its bark covered in a thick layer of moss that was surprisingly warm, like sitting on a living thing. He crouched in front of her, and at this height his eyes were level with hers, and the silver was extraordinary, up close, like looking into mercury, like looking into a mirror that reflected not your face, but something deeper. "I need you to understand something," he said, "and I need you to understand it now before we go further, because once we enter sovereignty territory, there are things that will happen quickly, and I will not have you make decisions without information. I am listening. You are my mate. The bond is active. I have waited for it since my first shift, and I had begun to believe it would not come. I am 34 years old, and every alpha in the known territories has been waiting for me to either take a chosen mate or die without an heir. And I have refused to do either because I am stubborn and my wolf is more stubborn, and neither of us was willing to settle for anything less than the real thing." He paused. "You are the real thing." She should have felt flattered or overwhelmed or swept away. What she actually felt was angry. "You do not know me." She said, "You know what your wolf recognizes. That is blood chemistry. That is not knowledge." He blinked. It was the first time she had seen him surprised, and on his face, surprise looked like a crack in granite brief and quickly sealed. "You are correct," he said. "I have spent my entire life being defined by what I am rather than who I am. To Grayhaven, I am an omega worthless. To you, I am a mate valuable. In neither case is anyone asking me what I want." He was quiet for a long moment. A bird called somewhere in the canopy above them, a sound like two stones being clicked together. "What do you want?" he asked. It was such a simple question, 4 words. She had never been asked it before, not by Mirren, who had used her skills without permission, not by Declan, who had sentenced her without curiosity, not by the pack that had watched her kneel on frozen stone and felt nothing. Her eyes stung. She blinked hard. "I want to not die today," she said. "Beyond that, I will need some time to think." "That is fair," Kael said. And he said it without impatience, without the patronizing indulgence of a powerful man humoring a less powerful woman. He said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. He stood. Can you ride what he shifted? The fluid dissolution of form, the liquid restructuring, and the massive wolf stood before her again, its silver eyes patient and steady and faintly, impossibly amused. It lowered its body to the ground and turned its head to look at her in a way that clearly meant get on. Elara had never ridden a wolf. She did not know anyone who had. It seemed like something from the old stories, the ones the elders told before bed, not something that happened to apothecary assistants from minor packs on the worst day of their lives. She climbed onto his back. His fur was thick and impossibly soft under her fingers, each strand warm as if heated from within. She buried her hands in the ruff of his neck, and his body heat seeped through the cloak and into her bones, chasing out the cold that had lived there so long she had forgotten what warmth felt like. He began to run. The forest blurred, trees became dark streaks against white snow. The wind should have been brutal at this speed, but his body blocked the worst of it, and the cloak whipped behind her like a banner. She pressed her face into the fur between his shoulder blades and breathed in that scent, cedar and honey and stone, and her wolf curled up inside her chest and for the first time in 23 years purred. They ran for hours, the terrain changed beneath them, the sparse pines of Grayhaven giving way to denser, older forest trees so massive their canopies blocked the sky entirely, and the world below became a cathedral of trunk and shadow. The air changed too, growing colder but cleaner each breath like drinking glacier water. Elara dozed. She could not help it. The rhythm of his stride was hypnotic, and she had not slept properly in 4 days, and her body simply overrode her mind and pulled her down into darkness. She woke to firelight. She was no longer on his back. She was lying on something soft, a pallet of furs, near a stone fireplace in which a real fire burned, the kind made from split oak that produces a steady, sustained heat rather than the flashy crackle of pine. The room was small and unbuilt of dark timber. The beams overhead, close enough to touch, and through the single window she could see snow falling in thick curtains against a sky that had gone indigo with twilight. A cabin deep in the mountains from the angle of the wind against the walls. Kael was sitting in a chair by the fire, dressed now in dark wool trousers and a loose linen shirt unlaced at the throat. He was reading. An actual book, leather bound its pages the color of weak tea. He turned a page without looking up. "There is broth on the hearth," he said, "and bread in the cloth by your left hand." She sat up. Her body ached in a dozen places, the accumulated complaints of 4 days in a stone cell, but the warmth had loosened her muscles and the worst of the stiffness was fading. She found the cloth-wrapped bread and tore off a piece. It was dark rye dense and slightly sweet, and the first bite made her jaw muscles cramp from disuse. She ate slowly. The broth was venison-rich with marrow and flecked with thyme, and she drank it directly from the bowl because her hands were shaking too badly to manage a spoon. She did not feel embarrassed about this. She had spent 11 years grinding tinctures and 16 hours on an execution platform. Dignity was a luxury she could purchase later. "Where are we?" she asked. "Ravencrest's Southern Way Station. We are 3 hours from the keep." He turned another page. "I sent a runner ahead. They are preparing quarters for you. Separate quarters." He looked up then. "Did you expect otherwise? I have heard stories about alpha kings and their mates. I imagine you have." He closed the book, marking his place with a strip of leather. "I imagine those stories involve a great deal of claiming and marking and immediate consummation. And I imagine the mates in those stories are given approximately as much choice in the matter as a rabbit in a snare." "That is accurate. I am not going to touch you without your permission," he said. "I need you to hear that and believe it. And I understand that believing it will take time because everything in your life has taught you that powerful men take what they want. I am a powerful man. I am aware of this. I am also aware that power without restraint is just another word for cruelty, and I have seen enough cruelty to last several lifetimes." She studied him across the firelight. The scar on his face caught the light and threw a thin shadow across his cheekbone. His hands resting on the closed book were large and scarred across the knuckles. The hands of a man who had fought many things and won. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Teeth," she said. "Mostly teeth." That ghost of a smile again, closer to manifesting this time. "I have those as well. But they are for other people." She finished the broth, set the bowl down, wrapped the cloak tighter around her shoulders, because despite the fire there was a chill in her that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the fact that 12 hours ago she had been waiting to die. "The death hymn," she said. "You called it your mother's song." The change in him was subtle, a slight tension in the shoulders. A shift in the way he held his hands. "My mother was Elara Ravencrest," he said. "Born Elara Nightsong, she was the last living descendant of the Nightsong bloodline, the wolves who served as keepers of the old songs before the Great Division. The death hymn you sang is not a hymn at all, it is a calling, a bloodline marker. Only wolves of Nightsong descent can sing it, and only in the presence of their fated mate." Elara's hands went still in her lap. "That is not possible," she said. "I am an Omega from Grayhaven. My parents were nobodies. My mother died in childbirth, and my father drank himself to death before I was 2. I was raised by the pack because no one else wanted me." "Your mother," Kael said carefully, "was she named in the pack records?" Elara opened her mouth to answer and found that she could not. She had seen the records once, years ago, when Miren had needed birth dates for a medicinal study. Elara's entry had been sparse. Female, Omega, Born spring equinox, mother deceased. Father deceased, no line name recorded, no line name. In a world where bloodline was everything, where your family name determined your rank and your rights and your place in the pack hierarchy, the absence of a line name was not an oversight, it was a deliberate erasure. Someone removed it, she said. Kael nodded. The Nightsong line was believed to have been exterminated during the Ashfall War 30 years ago. Every member of the family was hunted and killed because of a prophecy that the Nightsong wolves carried a power that could unmake an alpha's authority, the power of the old songs. The ability to command wolves through sound, through vibration, through a frequency that speaks directly to the animal rather than the man. He leaned forward, the firelight caught his silver eyes and turned them molten. You sang in the old tongue on an execution platform, he said, a language no one has spoken in 300 years. You sang it without training, without knowledge, from a place inside you that has been waiting your entire life for a reason to open. And my wolf, who has not responded to anything in 10 years, not to battle, not to challenge, not to the moon herself, heard your voice from 9 days away and wouldn't stop running until he found you. Elara was shaking. Not from cold, from the feeling of a trapdoor opening beneath a life she thought she understood. What are you telling me, she whispered. I am telling you that you are not an Omega. You were never an Omega. You are the last Nightsong wolf, and whoever hid you in Grayhaven did so because it was the last place anyone would look for a bloodline worth killing for. The fire popped. A spray of sparks rose and died. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing, and the snow fell and fell and fell. Elara pressed her palms flat against her thighs to stop them from trembling. Her mind was doing the thing it always did in crisis cataloging sorting, filing information into categories of useful and not yet useful. The apothecary's mind, the mind that had kept her alive in a pack that did not want her. If what you say is true, she said, then the people who killed my family's line may still be looking for survivors. They are. And by taking me from Grayhaven publicly in front of hundreds of witnesses, you have just announced my existence to every wolf with a political interest in the Nightsong prophecy. Kyle's expression didn't change. Yes, that was not strategic. No. He agreed. That was my wolf hearing his mate singing a death song and covering 9 days of terrain in 7 because the alternative was arriving too late. Strategy requires patience. I had none. There was something raw in the way he said it, something unguarded. For a man who held himself with such careful control, the admission of lost control was its own kind of vulnerability. And Elara recognized it because she had spent her life reading the bodies and faces of dangerous animals to predict what they would do next. He was afraid, she realized, not of enemies or prophecies or political fallout. He was afraid that she would look at the enormity of what he was offering and what it would cost and decide it was not worth it. He was afraid she would leave. She was not going to tell him that she was not going to leave. Not yet, because she did not know yet, because she was a woman who had been on her knees that morning waiting for an axe. And the distance between that and this was too far to cross in a single evening. I would like to sleep now, she said. He stood, picked up the book, moved toward the door to the cabin's second room. If you need anything, he said, I will hear you through the wall because of the bond, because the walls are thin. It was such an ordinary, practical, unromantic answer that she almost laughed. She did not laugh, but she felt the shape of where one would go like a socket waiting for a joint. He closed the door between them. She lay down on the pallet of furs and stared at the ceiling beams and listened to the fire settle and the wind howl and very faintly through the thin wall the sound of pages turning. She slept without dreaming for the first time in years. Morning brought clarity and complications in equal measure. Elara woke to the smell of oat porridge and pine smoke and the sound of voices outside the cabin. She dressed in the clothes that had been left folded on the chair by her pallet, simple wool trousers, and a tunic that were clearly meant for someone much larger, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips. She rolled them up and opened the door. Kael was standing in the clearing outside the cabin with 3 wolves in human form, 2 men and a woman, all of them dressed in the dark leathers and silver clasps, cloaks of sovereignty fighters. They were speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped the moment Elara appeared in the doorway. The woman looked at Elara with open curiosity. She was tall, sharp-featured, with a shaved head and a tattoo of a wolf's jawbone running from her left ear to her collarbone. Her eyes were the warm amber of standard alpha bloodline, and she carried herself with the loose-limbed ease of someone who was extremely good at violence and saw no need to advertise it. So, this is her, the woman said. Tessa, Kael said in a tone that was both greeting and warning. I am not going to bite her. Much. Tessa's gaze swept over Elara with professional assessment. She is thin. She has been in a cell for days. Before that, she is thin under the thin. That is long-term malnutrition. Look at the wrists. Look at the collarbones. Tessa walked toward Elara and stopped at arm's length. Do you have all your teeth? Tessa is my pack physician, Kael said in the tone of a man apologizing for a force of nature. I have all my teeth, Elara said. Good. I will need to do a full examination when we reach the keep. Blood work, bone density, muscle tone assessment. If you are Nightsong, there are markers I can check. Tessa paused. Also, someone has treated the burn scar on your wrist very badly. Was that intentional? No. There was no healer available. There was no healer in a pack of 800 wolves. There was no healer available to me. Tessa's expression as she went through several changes in rapid succession, settling on something hard and flat that Elara recognized as controlled anger directed at a target that was not present. Right, Tessa said. Right, okay, we are going to fix that. We are going to fix all of it. Come eat porridge before it congeals. They ate in the cabin. The two male wolves who introduced themselves as Brennan and Yari sat by the door in the posture of guards who were pretending to be casual. Kael ate, standing leaning against the wall by the window, watching the tree line with an alertness that Elara recognized as the particular focus of someone expecting trouble. Tell me about the political situation, Elara said. All four wolves looked at her. Most newly rescued mates ask about the keep, Tessa said. How many rooms? Whether there is hot water, is there hot water? Yes. Good. Now tell me about the political situation. Kael set down his bowl. The Ashfall Pack has been pushing at our southern border for 2 years. Their alpha, a man named Roderick Graves, has been consolidating smaller packs through forced absorption, essentially conquering them and folding their wolves into his ranks. He is building an army. For what purpose? The Northern Sovereignty has the only remaining access to the Moon Well. It is a natural formation deep in our territory that produces water with unique properties. Healing enhancement, some say it extends life. Graves wants it, and the Nightsong prophecy. Kael glanced at Tessa, who gave a small nod. The prophecy says that a Nightsong wolf can sing the Moon Well open, Kael said. The well has been sealed for 300 years, dry, inaccessible. My family has guarded a dormant spring for 12 generations. If you are truly Nightsong, you could wake it. Which makes me either the most valuable person in the known territories or the most dangerous. Both. Elara considered this while eating her porridge, which was thick and sweetened with honey and contained dried cranberries that burst tart against her tongue. Graves will come for me, she said. Yes. How soon spies move faster than wolves? You may already know. She scraped the last of the porridge from the bowl, set it down, looked at Kael directly. Then we should not waste time in a cabin, she said. They reached Ravencrest Keep by mid-afternoon. The keep was not what she expected. Grayhaven's Alpha residence was a modern compound, steel and glass designed to impress with its sleekness. Ravencrest Keep was old, genuinely old. Built into the face of a granite cliff, its walls were stone-fitted so precisely that no mortar was visible, and the towers rose from the rock as if they had grown there as natural and inevitable as the mountain itself. Ivy covered the lower walls in thick ropes of green, despite the winter somehow thriving in the cold. And the windows were narrow and deep-set, lit from within by a warm amber glow that made the entire structure look like a lantern carved from the earth. The gates were open. Wolves lined the entrance path, not guards, people, families, elders leaning on walking sticks, pups peering from behind their parents' legs, tradespeople with flour on their aprons and soot on their hands. They had come to see her, not to judge her, not to gawk to see. An old woman near the front of the crowd stepped forward as they approached. She was small and bent with age, her white hair braided into a crown, and her eyes were milky with cataracts. She reached out as Elara passed and caught her hand, and her grip was surprisingly strong, the grip of someone who had spent a lifetime doing physical work. Nightsong. The old woman whispered, her clouded eyes were wet. We waited. Elara did not know what to say to this. She squeezed the woman's hand and kept walking, and she felt the word follow her through the gate like a benediction. The inside of the keep was warm, not just physically, although the fires were generous and the stone walls radiated a deep geothermal heat that suggested the mountain itself was warm-blooded. But warm in the way a place is warm when it has been lived in and loved for a very long time. The hallways smelled of beeswax candles and smoked meat and the particular woody scent of very old books. Tapestries lined the walls faded with age, depicting wolves running through forests of silver trees. Kael led her through a maze of corridors to a door on the upper level. He opened it and stepped aside. The room was large by any standard, a bed with a frame carved from dark wood and piled with quilts, a fireplace already lit, a window overlooking a valley so vast and white with snow that looking at it felt like looking at the edge of the world, a writing desk with ink and paper, a shelf with books, and in the corner a copper bathtub, already filled, steam rising from the water's surface in lazy curls. "These are your quarters," Kael said. "Mine are in the east wing. Across the keep I told you your terms." She looked at this bathtub, the steam, the clean clothes laid out on the bed, the fire, the books. "You prepared all of this in the time it took us to ride here. I sent runners ahead last night. You planned for me to say yes to come here. I planned for you to have a choice," he said. "A warm room with a lock on the inside is a choice. A cold execution platform with rope around your wrists is not." She turned the lock experimentally. It was solid iron, well-oiled, heavy. The kind of lock that meant what it said. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head, turned to leave. "Kael." He stopped. "The death hymn, when you harmonized with me, did you know what it meant, that it was a calling?" He was quiet for a moment. His hand rested on the doorframe, and she noticed that his fingers were pressed hard against the wood, the tendons standing out along the back of his hand as if he were restraining himself from something. "I knew," he said. "My mother sang it to me every night until she died. She told me that someday someone would sing it back, and when they did, I would run and I would not stop until I found them." She was right. She usually was. He left. The door closed. Elara turned the lock, listened to its definitive click, and then she walked to the bathtub and lowered herself into the water and cried for 20 minutes without making a sound. The days that followed were strange and careful and full of small negotiations. Thessa's examination confirmed what Elara's body already knew. Years of malnutrition had left her bones brittle and her muscles atrophied. The burn scar on her wrist was a keloid that had formed over poorly healed tissue, the result of a wound that should have been treated immediately and was instead left to fester for weeks. Her wolf, newly awakened, was strong but untrained, an enormous potential trapped in a body that had never been taught to use it. "You are a mess," Thessa said cheerfully, wrapping Elara's wrist in a poultice that smelled of comfrey and calendula. "A magnificent, historically significant mess. Can you confirm the Nightsong, bloodline, the markers are there? Elevated serotonin production, unusual auditory cortex development. Vocal cord density approximately 3 times normal. Your singing voice is not just beautiful, it is literally built differently. There are structures in your throat that I have only ever seen described in texts so old they are written on bark. So it is real. It is real. You are Nightsong." The last one. Teresa tied off the bandage with precise, gentle hands. "Which means you are either going to save us all or paint a very large target on the Alpha King's back, possibly both." Kael gave her space. This surprised her more than anything else, more than the cabin, more than the ride, more than the revelation about her bloodline. He was present without being oppressive. She saw him at meals where he sat at the head of a long table surrounded by his inner council and ate with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything else. She saw him in the corridors where he would incline his head as they passed and sometimes pause to ask if she needed anything. And when she said no, he accepted this without pushing. She saw him in the training yards from her window, sparring with Brennan and Yari in his wolf form, and the sight of it made her breath catch because he fought the way water flowed, all fluid power and devastating inevitability. And when he pinned Brennan to the ground, his silver eyes would flash, and for a moment the wolf was so visible in the man that the distinction between them dissolved entirely. She also saw him reading. Often. He read in the library, in the great hall, in the corridor outside her door, when he thought she could not hear him settling against the wall with a book and a quiet exhalation. He was always reading. It was so at odds with the image of the warrior king that she found herself thinking about it at odd moments, wondering what he read, wondering if the books in her room had been chosen by him. She checked. They had. An herbal compendium so comprehensive it made Mirren's entire library look like a pamphlet, a history of the Nightsong lineage, a collection of folk tales from the Northern Territories. And tucked at the end of the shelf, a thin volume of poetry by an author she did not recognize. Dog-eared at specific pages, the margins annotated in a handwriting she was beginning to know. She read his annotations. They were sparse and precise. Beside a line about the patience of stones, he had written, "Is this patience or paralysis? Not the same." Beside a verse about the sound the river makes when it finds the sea, he had written a single word, "Yes." She was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble she was used to, the trouble of surviving, of keeping her head down, of being invisible in a world that punished visibility. This was a different kind entirely. This was the trouble of beginning to want something she had taught herself not to want. 2 weeks after her arrival, Graves made his move. It happened at night. Elara was in the library, which she had claimed as a second home, surrounded by texts on vocal resonance and the old songs teaching herself the things she should have been taught from birth. She had discovered that her voice could do things, not just sing resonate. She could hum a frequency that made candle flames bow toward her. She could sustain a note that caused water to form patterns on a flat surface, geometric shapes that looked like the symbols in the oldest texts. She was very carefully and very slowly learning what she was. The warning howl came at midnight. It was not a single voice, it was a cascade, dozens of wolves calling from the perimeter walls in a sequence that Elara had learned meant one thing: hostile forces incoming multiple. She was out of the library and in the corridor before the last howl faded. Kael was already there, moving fast, dressed in fighting leathers, his silver eyes bright with a focus that was not anger but something more controlled and more dangerous. Graves has crossed the southern border, he said. 300 wolves moving fast. 300 against 12,000, 300 that we can see. Graves does not attack with everything at once. He probes, finds the weakness, sends the real force through the gap. Kael stopped, turned to her. He is not here for territory. He is here for you. I know. I need you to go to the inner keep, the vault level. Tessa will be there. No. The word hung between them. She watched his jaw tighten, watched the effort it cost him not to simply pick her up and carry her to safety, watched the wolf behind his eyes fight the man for control. Elara, I am Nightsong. You said it yourself. My voice commands wolves. If Graves brings an army to your gates, I am not a liability hiding in a vault. I am a weapon standing on your wall. You have been training for 2 weeks. I sang the death hymn with no training at all, and your wolf came running from 9 days away. Imagine what I can do on purpose. He stared at her. She stared back. The moment stretched and hummed between them like a plucked string. If you are on that wall, he said very quietly, I will not be able to focus on anything except keeping you alive. You understand that? My wolf will not let me fight if you are in danger. You are asking me to be weaker. I am asking you to trust me. A muscle jumped in his jaw. His hands opened and closed at his sides. The candles in the corridor flickered, though there was no draft. Stay behind Brennan, he said. At all times. If the wall is breached, you go to the vault. Those are my terms. Accepted. They moved together to the southern wall. The night was clear and viciously cold. The stars so bright they cast shadows. From the top of the wall, Elara could see the tree line a quarter-mile distant, and within the trees, movement. Hundreds of shapes flowing between the trunks, darker than the shadows they moved through. Kael stood at the center of the wall, his counsel flanking him. He had not shifted. He stood in human form, arms at his sides, watching the approaching force with the perfect stillness of a man who has faced many armies and found them all ultimately disappointing. A figure emerged from the tree line. Roderick Graves was smaller than Elara expected. After Kael, everyone was smaller than she expected, but Graves was genuinely compact. A lean man with sharp features and copper-red hair pulled back in a tight knot. He walked with the bantam swagger of someone who compensated for physical stature with political ruthlessness, and his eyes, visible even at this distance because they reflected the torchlight with an eerie yellow sheen, were fixed on the wall with undisguised hunger. Ravencroft, Graves called, his voice carrying with the practiced projection of a man who made speeches. I am here for the Nightsong girl. Give her to me and I will withdraw. This does not need to be bloody. Kael said nothing. She is not yours to keep, Graves continued. The Nightsong bloodline belongs to all packs. The Moonwell is a shared resource. You have guarded a dry spring for 12 generations out of arrogance, and now that the key to opening it has appeared, you would hoard that too. Kael said nothing. Graves's composure flickered. Speak, damn you. Kael leaned forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the way stone carries sound, through the ground, through the wall, through the bones of everyone listening. You poisoned the well in Grayhaven. Silence. You contaminated the water supply. You had your agents plant hemlock in the western well. You arranged for the Omega apothecary to be found with hemlock on her hands. You engineered her execution because you knew what she was, and you wanted her dead before anyone else discovered it. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She turned to look at Kael. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Graves. His expression was calm, terrifyingly calm. You didn't come here to claim her, Kael said. You came here because your assassination attempt failed, and now that she is alive and under my protection, you need to retrieve her before she learns what she can do, before she opens the Moonwell, before she becomes something you cannot control. Graves' face had gone rigid. The yellow eyes darted left, right, calculating routes, exits, possibilities. How long have you known? Graves said. And the pretense of diplomatic negotiation was gone from his voice, replaced by something flat and reptilian. My spies intercepted your agent in Grayhaven 6 days ago. He was very forthcoming once Thessa explained the alternatives. Elara's mind was racing. The poisoned well, the hemlock on her hands, the convenient accusation. The execution scheduled so quickly that no proper investigation was possible. It had all been Graves, her near death, her kneeling on frozen stone, the axe that had been moments from her neck. All of it orchestrated by the man standing in the torchlight below because she was dangerous to him alive, and convenient to him dead. Something ignited in her chest, not anger, though anger was there. Something deeper, something that sang in the frequency of the old songs, in the vibration that lived in her bones and her blood, and the strange dense chords of her throat. Her wolf surged forward, not in pain this time, but in power. And the feeling was nothing like the gentle uncoiling of their first meeting. This was a detonation, this was a door being kicked open. She opened her mouth. The sound that came out was not singing, not exactly. It was a note, a single sustained frequency that came from a place below her diaphragm and above her soul. And it hit the night air like a hammer hitting a bell. The wall vibrated beneath her feet. The torches flared. The stars themselves seemed to sharpen their light, intensifying until the shadows below fled to the edge of the tree line. Graves' wolves heard it. She saw them react, not with fear, though fear was present, with compulsion. The note spoke to the wolf in each of them, to the ancient animal that predated pack hierarchy and alpha authority and territorial lines. It said in a language older than words, "Stop." They stopped. 300 wolves mid-advance frozen in place. Not paralyzed, choosing. The note did not force them. It reminded them. It reminded them that they had a choice, that the compulsion to follow an alpha was not the same as the inability to disobey, that somewhere inside each of them was a wolf that was its own creature beholden to no one. Graves spun to face his army. Move. I command you to move. Some did. The ones closest to Graves, the ones whose loyalty was personal rather than coerced, broke free of the note's influence and surged forward. But most did not. Most stood in the snow, trembling, caught between two authorities, one that demanded and one that invited. Kael shifted. The sound of his shift was different this time. Not the fluid silence of the cabin. A roar. The wolf that erupted from his human form hit the ground running and cleared the wall in a single bound 20 feet down to the snow below, and the impact sent a shockwave through the frozen earth that Elara felt in her teeth. He threw the advancing wolves like a scythe through wheat, not killing, disabling. A jaw clamped on a shoulder, a paw sweeping legs, a body check that sent a 200-pound wolf tumbling through the snow like a rag doll. He moved with the terrifying efficiency of a predator that understood exactly how much force was needed to neutralize each threat and applied precisely that amount and no more. Graves ran. He shifted mid-stride, his human form collapsing into a red-furred wolf that was faster than anything his size had a right to be, and he bolted for the tree line with the desperate speed of a gambler who has just realized the game is rigged. Kael caught him in 4 strides. The Alpha King's jaw closed around the back of Graves' neck, not biting, not yet, just holding, the way a parent holds a misbehaving pup, and the sheer indignity of it was worse than any wound. Graves hung in Kael's grip legs, scrabbling uselessly at the air, whining through his teeth. Kael carried him back to the base of the wall. He dropped Graves in the snow, shifted back to human form, stood over the red wolf, naked and steaming in the cold air, blood from minor scratches running down his arms in thin lines that looked black in the torchlight. Shift, Kael said. Graves shifted. He knelt in the snow, shivering his copper hair loose around his face. And for one moment, just one Elara saw something in his eyes that was not calculation or cruelty. It was grief. A flash so brief it was almost imperceptible, the grief of a man who had spent so long pursuing power that he had forgotten why he wanted it, who had crossed so many lines that he could no longer find his way back to the person he had been before crossing them. He looked up at Kael and his mouth opened, and for an instant Elara thought he was going to say something true. Then it was gone. The yellow eyes hardened, the jaw set. Kill me then, Graves said. Make your spectacle. Kael looked at him for a long time. No, Kael said. The word rippled through the assembled wolves like a stone through water. You poisoned a well that pups drink from, Kael said. You framed an innocent woman, you engineered an execution, you marched 300 wolves to their death on a gamble. Death would make you a martyr to the wolves you have brainwashed into loyalty. Death would be easy, I am not going to give you easy. He turned to Tessa, who had appeared at the base of the wall with a contingent of sovereignty fighters. Strip his bond, Kael said. Graves' face went white, truly white, the color of paper, the color of bone. You cannot, he breathed. Watch me. Bond stripping. Elara knew the term from the old texts, the surgical severance of an alpha's connection to his pack. Not death. Worse. A wolf with no bond was a wolf with no pack, no territory, no identity, a ghost in a living body. The cruelest punishment in the known world reserved for crimes that death was not sufficient to answer. Fessa and 2 sovereignty wolves led Graves away. He did not fight. He had gone limp, all resistance draining from him like water from a cracked vessel. As they passed through the gate, he turned his head and looked at Elara on the wall above, and his lips moved in words she could not hear but somehow understood. You should have let them kill you. Not a threat, a lament. The last words of a man who understood that the world had just changed and he was on the wrong side of the change. The battle, such as it was over. Graves's wolves, freed from his immediate influence and shaken by the note Elara had sung, surrendered in droves. Some knelt in the snow, others simply sat down and waited. A few howled long and low and directionless, the sound of wolves who had forgotten what freedom felt like and were afraid of it. Kael stood in the field among them. He did not speak, he did not command, he simply stood, blood cooling on his skin, his breath white in the air, and let his presence do the work. Wolves approached him one at a time, cautiously, the way you approach a fire when you have been cold for a very long time. They lowered their heads. Some pressed their noses against his hand, a kind of oath, a kind of prayer. Elara watched from the wall. Her voice was raw. The note she had sung had taken something from her, some deep reserve of energy she hadn't known she possessed, and her body was trembling with the aftermath. But her wolf was alive inside her, more alive than it had ever been, humming with a satisfaction that vibrated through her bones like a tuning fork. Kael looked up at her across the field through the torchlight and the settling chaos. His silver eyes found hers, and the look on his face was the simplest thing she had ever seen. Not triumph, not possession, not the arrogance of a king who had with just defended his territory and his mate in a single night. Relief. Pure, devastating relief. The face of a man who had been afraid, genuinely afraid for the first time in a long time, and was only now allowing himself to feel it. She understood then what she wanted. The question he had asked her in the cabin, the one she had deferred with practical deflection, had been working its way through her for 2 weeks. And the answer had arrived not in words, but in this moment, in the way his fear for her was written on his face in a language she could finally read. The keep was quiet by the time the prisoners were secured and the wounded were treated and the adrenaline had faded enough for exhaustion to replace it. Elara found Kael in the library. He was sitting in the chair by the fire, not reading, just sitting. His wounds had been cleaned and bandaged, white linen wrapped around his forearms and one strip across his ribs where a claw had caught him. He looked tired in a way she did not seen before, the kind of tired that goes deeper than the body. She sat in the chair across from him. You knew about Graves before you came for me, she said. The spies, the poisoned well. You knew. I knew someone was hunting the last nightingale wolf. I did not know where she was until I felt the bond. You came for me before you knew the political implications. I came for you because you were singing a death song and my wolf lost his mind. She studied him, the scar, the silver eyes dulled now with fatigue, the hands resting on the arms of the chair, the bandages already showing small spots of red where the wounds beneath had reopened. I have an answer, she said to your question from the cabin. He went very still. You asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted to not die, and beyond that, I needed time to think. She paused. I have thought. He waited. He was very good at waiting, she had learned. Patience that was not paralysis. His own annotation turned back on him. I want to open the moon well, she said. I want to learn every old song that exists. I want to train my voice until I can do what my bloodline was meant to do. I want to protect the wolves who surrendered tonight because they followed a tyrant out of fear and they deserve better than what they had. She paused again. And I want to stay here with you, not because of the bond, not because you are the Alpha King and I have nowhere else to go. Because you gave me a locked door and a room with books and you sat in a hallway reading instead of breaking down the door. And that is the first act of genuine kindness anyone has shown me in 23 years. He did not move, he did not speak. Something happened behind his eyes. A shift, a breaking, a reconstruction, as if a structure he had been holding in place through sheer force of will had just been given permission to stand on its own. The marking, he said, his voice was rough. The claiming, it does not have to happen now. It does not have to happen on a schedule. I know. I will wait. I know that too. She stood, crossed the distance between the 2 chairs. It was only 4 steps, but each one felt like a decision. She stopped in front of him and looked down at his face, at the scar and the silver eyes and the tight line of his mouth. And she placed her hand on the side of his face the way he had placed his on hers on the execution platform. Her palm against his jaw, her thumb on the edge of the scar. His eyes closed. The sound he made was not human, it was a wolf sound, a low vibration in his chest that she felt through her palm and her wrist and all the way up her arm to her heart. His hand came up and covered hers, pressing it harder against his face, and his fingers were trembling. "Not now," she said softly, "but soon and on my terms. On your terms," he repeated, "always." She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his scent filled her lungs. Cedar honeystone, the warm animal smell of wolf and man combined, and underneath it, the particular scent that was uniquely his, the one her wolf recognized the way a bird recognizes magnetic north. They stayed like that for a long time. Foreheads touching, breathing, synchronized the fire settling into embers. Later that night, she could not sleep, not from fear, not from cold, from the hum. It had started after the battle, a persistent vibration in her chest that was not unpleasant, but was insistent the way a thought is insistent when it demands attention. Her wolf was awake and alert and pulling her toward something with the gentle inevitability of a current. She left her room barefoot on the stone floor, the cold biting into her soles. Down the corridor, down the stairs, through the great hall where the fire had burned to a glowing bed of coals, through a door she had not noticed before, set into the stone wall behind a tapestry depicting wolves drinking from a pool of silver light. Stairs spiraling down into the mountain. The temperature changed, growing warmer with each step, and the air took on a mineral quality, the smell of deep stone and subterranean water and something else, something electric like the air before lightning. She reached the bottom. The cavern was enormous. The ceiling vanished into darkness above, and the walls were smooth as glass carved by water over millennia. In the center of the cavern floor was a depression circular, perhaps 30 feet across its surface, dry and cracked like a riverbed in drought. The moon well. It pulsed. She could feel it. A frequency coming from the dry stone, a vibration that matched the hum in her chest so precisely that the two became one. And she understood with a clarity that bypassed her mind entirely and went straight to her marrow that the well had been waiting. Not for a Nightsong wolf in general. For her specifically, the way Kael's wolf had been waiting for her voice across 9 days of distance and 2 blizzards and a border war. She stood at the edge of the dry well and opened her mouth and sang. Not the death hymn this time, something new, something that came from the place where the old songs lived, the deep cellular memory of a bloodline that had been singing since before wolves had names. The melody was simple and complex at once like water, and it filled the cavern the way water fills a vessel rising from the floor, sliding along the walls, pressing against the ceiling. The well responded, a sound deep below hearing, a vibration that came from the mountain itself, from the bedrock, from the hidden aquifer that had been sealed for 3 centuries. Elara felt it in her feet, in her knees, in her pelvis, traveling up her spine like a second heartbeat. Water appeared, not a trickle, not a seep, a rising. Slow at first, then accelerating silver-bright water welling up from the cracked stone like blood returning to a limb that had been tourniquet-bound. It was warm, she could feel the heat of it on her face from feet away, and it glowed a soft luminescence that was not reflected light but generated light, as if the water itself was a living thing that had been asleep and was now finally opening its eyes. The well filled to the brim and stopped. Elara stopped singing. The silence was absolute. The water's surface was mirror still, and in it she saw her own reflection and something else, something behind her. Kael. He stood at the base of the stairs, haloed in the silver light reflecting off the water, and his face wore an expression she would carry for the rest of her life. Not awe, though awe was there. Not pride, not possessiveness, wonder. The naked, defenseless wonder of a man witnessing a miracle he had been told about as a child and had believed in against all evidence and logic and years of silence. "You woke it," he said. "It was waiting for me." He walked to the edge of the well and stood beside her. The silver light caught them both, casting their shadows on the cavern wall in shapes that merged and parted and merged again. "Elara," he said. "Yes. I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not out of obligation or gratitude or the bond. Ask, do you want this? Not just staying, not just safety, this, us, the claiming, the pack, a life that will be complicated and political and sometimes dangerous and always mine trying to be worthy of yours." She looked at the water, at his reflection in it wavering and silver, at her own face thin and scarred and alive. "I want it," she said. "I want all of it." He turned to her. In the moonwell's light, his eyes were not silver, but white, blazing, incandescent. The eyes of a wolf that has found its mate at the end of a very long search. He cupped her face in both hands, and his palms were rough and warm, and she could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, the only evidence that the Alpha King of the Northern Sovereignty was capable of nervousness. "May I?" he said. She tilted her head, bared the left side of her neck. His mouth found the curve where her neck met her shoulder. His lips were warm. His breath was a ghost against her skin. She felt the points of his canines, and they were sharp enough to be terrifying if she did not trust the man behind them. And she did trust him not because of the bond or the bloodline or the prophecy, but because he had read poetry in a hallway outside her locked door and written "yes" in the margin next to a line about a river finding the sea. He bit. The pain was brief, a flash, a flare, and then it was gone, replaced by something so vast and warm and encompassing that she lost her footing and would have fallen if his arms had not been around her. The bond opened like a door, like a flower, like the moon well itself, and she felt him. Not just his presence himself, the weight of his loneliness, the depth of his patience, the ferocity of his love, which was not gentle and not safe and not small, but was absolutely, unshakably certain. She felt his wolf, a massive silver presence in the bond space, pressing against her wolf with the delighted abandon of an animal reunited with its pack. She felt his fear that she would leave, that she would realize the enormity of what he was, and decide it was too much, that he would do something wrong, make some error of judgment or tenderness, and lose her. She put her hand on his chest over his heart. It was hammering. The Alpha King's heart was hammering like a pup's. "I am not going anywhere," she said. His arms tightened around her. He pressed his face into her hair. She felt the wetness on her scalp and understood that he was crying silently the way men cry when they have forgotten how and are remembering. They stood in the silver light of the moon, well in the mountain's heart, in the warmth that rose from the ancient water, and the cavern hummed around them with a frequency that was neither his voice nor hers, but both woven together, a harmony that had been waiting 300 years to be sung. The marking ceremony was held 3 days later. Not because tradition demanded haste, but because Elara had asked for it. She had spent 23 years invisible, denied, erased. She wanted to stand in front of 12,000 wolves and be seen. Not as an Omega, not as a Nightsong curiosity. As a choice, his choice, her choice. A choice made freely by two people who could have walked away and decided not to. The Great Hall of Ravencrest Keep was built for moments like this. The ceiling soared 40 feet above, supported by columns of natural stone that still bore the chisel marks of the wolves who had carved them generations ago. Torches lined the walls, their flames steady and gold, and the hall was packed with wolves from every rank and station. Fighters in their leathers, tradespeople in their working clothes. The old woman who had called her Nightsong at the gate sitting in the front row, her clouded eyes streaming. Elara wore white simple linen unadorned because she had never needed adornment, and she was not going to start performing for an audience now. The claiming mark on her neck was visible above the collar, silver, scarred and permanent, a declaration written in flesh. Kael wore black. No crown, no ceremonial weapons, just a man in a dark shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and his silver eyes fixed on the woman walking toward him through a hall of 12,000 silent wolves. The ceremony was short. The words were in the old tongue spoken by the pack elder, and Elara understood them now, every syllable the language that had been sleeping in her blood, waking up word by word. Kael took her hand. His grip was steady. His eyes were not, mine, he said. Not a claim, an offering, the word given, not taken. Yours, she said, and meant it. Every letter. The howl that went up from 12,000 wolves shook the mountain. Elara felt it in the stone beneath her feet, in the walls, in the distant moonwell whose water rippled in response. The howl was not a sound, it was a belonging. 12,000 voices saying simultaneously that the woman who had knelt on frozen granite in a minor pack's execution square was now the Luna of the Northern Sovereignty, and heaven help anyone who forgot it. She didn't cry, she was done crying. She had cried enough for 23 years of silence, and what she felt now was not sadness or relief or even joy. It was something quieter. Something that felt like the moment after you set down a weight you have been carrying so long you forgot what your shoulders felt like without it. That night, after the celebrations, after the feasting and the music and the howling and the toasts, and the old woman pressing a small carved wolf into Elara's palm and whispering, "Your grandmother made this." After all of it, Elara stood at the window of the room that was now theirs and looked out over the valley. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear, the moon hung low over the mountains, full and white and so bright it cast wolf-shaped shadows across the unmarked snow. Kael came up behind her, his arms circled her waist. His chin rested on top of her head. She could feel his heartbeat against her back slow and even the heartbeat of a man who was for the first time in a very long time at rest. "The moon well will need a keeper," she said. "It has one. I will need to train, learn the old songs, all of them." "Yes. There will be other packs, other challenges. Graves was not the last wolf who will want what we have. No. I will not hide in a vault, I know." She leaned back against him. His arms tightened. Outside, a wolf howled from the tree line, a single clear note that hung in the air like a bell. And after a moment, another answered, and another, until the valley was filled with voices. Elara opened her mouth and sang softly, just for him, a fragment of the old melody, the one his mother had sung to him as a child, the one that had called him across 9 days and 2 blizzards to an execution platform where a woman he had never met was singing herself to death. His chest vibrated, against her back the low rumble of his wolf answering, harmonizing. The moon watched, the snow gleamed, and the mountain below them the moon well glowed silver, and its light crept up through the stone floors of the keep like a slow tide touching the walls, the tapestries, the sleeping wolves, the joined shadows of a king and his mate framed in a narrow window. And the music they made together rose through the glass and joined the chorus in the valley and was carried by the wind to the very edge of the world where the mountains met the sky. And the old songs finally, after 300 years of silence, had someone to sing them home.